and I'm excited to see kind of the stuff that you've been working on, secretly. And then I kind of jump into PIVX, and I see sort of like this whole community of people kind of interacting, and I see that tip bot, right? And that tip bot was like, hey, this is cool, right? I got a command line where I could just send money around. So I was out sending money. I'm impersonating the human CI, saying, send me your ties, give me all the money, right? And it's cool, like the money's moving around in this frictionless fashion, right? So a lot of progress is happening in different areas. One of the best things we can do is really form an umbrella organization. That's one of the things that I'm working on. Try to be an evangelist. Since I build my sort of personal brand, people know who the hell I am. For some reason, they like to hear me talk, and they like what I write. So I want to say, look, all these projects that are out there, come into the fold. Come here, right? We're all working on this problem. Right? Let's work on various aspects of this problem together. Because each person is sort of, like you said, working on this massive piece of this giant freaking puzzle, right? It is a big puzzle, and it's really complicated, right? And you get a number of people go, yeah, if we could just have this. And then another person go, if we could just have this. And if we could just have this. Well, of course, if we could have all of that, it'd be freaking great. But we've got to do it all. And unfortunately, we have this little thing, it's called time. And it kind of slows everything down, right? And then you have this thing working together. That's also a problem, where you got to kind of get everyone going in the same direction. Herding cats. Okay, everybody, we're going here. Like we were trying to get dinner the other night. It's like 10, 18 people. I thought it was going to be 4, and it's 18 people. And then we call, well, maybe we can only get 12. So those other, other people got to go somewhere else. But then somebody only has an opening in May. Right? So then we finally we get a place. 12 people is there. We've all gone in the same direction. We were supposed to go out at 8:30. I think we got there at 9:45. So that's, the thing is, things always take longer than you want. So I encourage everyone to have patience. Now, did the person who wants to hear about biometrics and shit show up? Yes, okay. So I can talk about the decentralized ID. So, when I was crafting Cicada, I wasn't thinking about a cryptocurrency. I was thinking about how do I create a voting system, and how the hell do I create a representative-less government? Because you have these little problem of people are dumb and bored. They get bored easily, right? So how do you create something that kind of keeps people interested in participating in their democracy? Because they barely participate in the one where somebody is elected and goes and does shit, right? And then also how do you have one man or woman and one vote, right? And to do that, I realized I needed to create an ID system, a biometric ID system, or what I call a human unique identifier. I also wanted to make sure that I wouldn't have the Indian and a heart problem, where you basically create this system that allows you to be tracked in pretty much everything you do in your life, right? Because this is, potentially a huge nightmare for humanity. So I don't want to get into all of the technical details. I'm happy to sit down with anyone who's like really into all the technical details. I'll lose half of my audience, or actually 75% of it. But the main concept is that you use, I thought, your iris scan, because it's for numerous technological reasons, where you basically create a public-private key pair, right, in a decentralized fashion. And there are a number of sort of mechanisms in there that allow you to do this. Some people think this is impossible, so I wrote a second white paper to prove them wrong. And I'll probably have to write more on this concept. But the main concept is people think you can only have a centralized ID. In other words, only if an authority comes and says, you are an official person. I've decided, right? You now have my stamp of approval that that's the only thing that can work. But actually, what I've sort of discovered is centralized IDs have the same sort of level of problems of fraud and everything else. And they have sort of a strong creation, but a weak control on the output, right? So one of the things I thought is you can create a number of systems to kind of govern creating the decentralized ID. But then you also need this thing on the other side to help kind of control it, right? And that's sort of what we call a reputation system. Now, when I say a reputation system, most people immediately start thinking of like voting on restaurants, or like Uber, right? The guy drove me somewhere, and we both kind of vote for each other. And that system is kind of a basic level reputation system. Because what happens on Uber? If anyone's lower than 4.6, it's like being rated at 1. So essentially, like, they've created this 5-point scale that's useless, because it really only goes from 4, 6 to 5. And then you're a pariah, and nobody wants to get in your car. And why does that happen? Because they go, well, we both got out of the car. I didn't really like this guy. Maybe he didn't really like me. but you know, we're both looking at each other. We go, how are you, you know, like, we're both thinking, how are you going to vote? I better defensively vote this motherfucker a 5, right? Because I want him to vote 5 for me. So then everybody's 5 stars, or 4.6 stars, and you have something that's worthless, right? So what I started thinking is you've got to have a reputation at all layers of the system that's algorithmic, and that one aspect where you're reading people only has use in certain things, like when you're interacting with a business. You know, so a good example is if I have different nodes on the network, and we just start, you know, Matthias and I start talking, just by interacting on the network, connecting with new people, that's sort of a positive vote on the reputation. If a bunch of people say this guy's a, you know, a scumbag troll, and they start sort of saying no, cutting me off and blocking me, that's sort of a hit to my reputation, right? But we're not voting, I really like Matthias, I do. But we're not voting to say that, it's just we're interacting. So it's sort of like a Turing test to say, are you using the idea in the world over time, or are you a real person, right? And in additional things, you put things at like the networking level, the reputation system at the networking level. So essentially you have 2 nodes talking to each other, and one of them starts doing malicious stuff. Right? It starts sending screwed up packets to the other machine. I'm gonna get a little technical here, so everybody can just, your eyes can glaze over if you don't understand. And you know, I'm trying to see, is it violating my rules? So you have a blockchain storing a set of rules of what you're supposed to be able to do on the network and not. And it's testing. You know, are you running the latest rule sets? And can you prove that you are? If not, we got a problem. Hitting your reputation. You're doing this sort of malicious stuff, hit on the reputation. The system might vote. Hey, this node keeps sending me crap. It keeps violating the rules. Vote. And other nodes might vote to a blockchain, and essentially that node might get blacklisted for a period of time. Maybe it might be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, hour, right? It might escalate over time, right? So all this is happening at an algorithmic layer, and you're basically updating the rules as people learn to exploit them, because people are really good at exploiting rules. And so you continually kind of update these rules over time, right? And then also what you have is reputation in terms of weight. So this is a little like proof of stake for all the crypto nerds out there. And proof of stake is a bit like, but not totally. Weight is more like, I'm an organization, okay? A company, and I'm hiring Guillermo, and Guillermo's got his ID, and I'm not just gonna hire a sock puppet who made up their ID. I'm gonna interview Guillermo, to see if he's a real person, if he knows what the hell he's talking about, look at his resume. Oh, so what am I doing? I'm Turing testing. Is he bot? Is he real? Right, he's gonna fly out, he's gonna show up in my office. Unless they've developed Android technology, he's probably a real person, right? So, and at that point, I now hire him, and through his ID, I'm giving him now access to, imagine this in the future, VPN, stock shares on the blockchain, access to the documents behind the firewall, et cetera, with this ID, right? I've now given role-based access control to my company with his ID in the real world, right? And now I put my weight behind it. I say, Guillermo seems to be a real person, he's working for me now, right? And so that raises his trust level. And it allows him to do different things on the network, right? And that basically allows you to interact at different levels. And is it a perfect system? There is no perfect system, get that out of your mind. So what you want to do is build something that works, 99% of the time. You want to understand that there's going to be kind of outliers, right, screw-ups, and then you want to adjust for those things. And you also want to assume that there's always going to be hostile actors in the system, and you'll never be able to get rid of them. That's another part of the dictator playbook. We're going to eliminate all the enemies of the people. Unfortunately, there just turns out to be a lot of enemies of the people, so you got to keep eliminating people. So we don't want to do that, right? We want to get to the point where you're going to assume that there's going to be people who don't want to participate in the system. They want to try to cheat it, right? Whether it's it's part of our game philosophy. So you want to know how those things are happening. And the reputation system so the ID as I design it really is an inversion of the centralized system. And that is we have strong controls on the centralized ID creation and weak controls on the usage of the ID. That's why there's fraud all the time. My sister's identity got stolen, and they go, we got you. We're going to put an alert on the cards. Every time this guy goes and uses your ID to open up cards, you're going to get an alert. Except, he just keeps opening stuff, It's a brute force attack, and sometimes they forget to call it. Oh, so maybe he gets $5 grand, and then they got to return it, right? And then eventually he gets bored and moves on to stealing someone else's stuff. So we have this kind of rampant fraud, right? And so this reverses the concept, where essentially you have slightly weaker controls on the creation, strong controls on the usage, which I feel is a superior system, because that's where you're using it most of the time. Creation is 5 seconds, using it is the rest of your life. So that's where you kind of want to put your efforts, right? And in addition, I looked back over a lot of research as I was working on this, and I found, for instance, David Chaum was a famous cryptographer. He'd already essentially figured out a lot of this shit in the 1980s. He even figured out something like this, cell phone. He called it a card computer. It didn't exist. And he essentially had this concept that you could have these sub-IDs, okay? And these sub-IDs might essentially only contain a little bit of your information, right? You might say, okay, I've got my credit card and my name. And so imagine that in the future, I go to like an eBay and I give them my sub-ID token, okay? And they're just storing this sub-ID token, or they're storing the rights to access that information in an information wallet. Instead of just a money wallet, now I'm storing my personal information here, instead of putting it all in these centralized databases, because they do a great job of security. I don't know if you've seen maybe any of these breaches that happen, but if you kind of look around, there's probably like a giant breach every other day of a major company's information. In fact, it's actually likely that there's 1 in 7 people, somebody else has your social security number if you're in America. There are multiple people, I think 5 to 10 million, where at least 3 people have their social security number, which is awesome. Really that works great. And then all of a sudden you get this notification that we've broken into this centralized system. And of course, why wouldn't you break into this centralized system? There's the old aphorism that why rob a man on the street when I can go rob a fucking bank? They've got all the money. I don't want to just rob Guillermo and Lon. I get $30. Right? I can go rob the bank, I get $1 million. So it's the same thing with IDs. They go rob all of this information, and now I can use that for identity fraud to spin up 10 million other IDs, go hack somebody else, see? So the idea is you invert that on its head too. So now I'm giving them this token. They know just enough about me to do business with me, and at some point in time, if I don't want them to have access to my information, which is stored with me, I delete it and they don't have access anymore, and they're not selling my data. Right? And so I control it. And now they've got to go attack all of us individually. Now, well, that's great. I'm going to write some malware. I'm going to go after these guys. So again, this is where I try to think of security at multiple layers. And I also try to think, how do I use the tools of evil against evil? Right? I'm a big fan of studying the techniques of evil. I watch a lot of Donald Trump speeches, and what he uses is repetition. What he uses is repetition. And so you really want to repeat things again and again, and you want to use visual imagery, like those people are snakes, and you want that to stick in someone's mind, that they're snakes. Right? And so I try to use the tools of evil for good, and so one of the things I think about is, how do malware writers kind of do things? And we talked a little about one of the developers, we talked about this, the developer Matthias. How do malware writers do the things that they do? So I noticed that several malware writers got really creative. In fact, malware is an industry. It's actually like an underground industry where there are entire gangs who have whole coder teams much bigger than freaking Fermat writing viruses to steal your information. They have scrum teams, they have release cycles. I'm not shitting you, okay? And this happens all the time. And so then they also got really smart. They knew that there were these things called antivirus companies, and that these antivirus companies would be trying to isolate the virus so that they could study it and tear it apart and create a definition for it. And so these virus writers got smart, and they started creating these rules. They started encrypting the virus, and a little bit of the virus would start up, and it would morph into a different shape, so it was harder to track down. And it would check out and talk to these command and control servers, like, hey, can I get to the network? Am I running in a virtual machine? Because I want to know whether I'm trying to be isolated. And can I talk to the command and control servers? If I can't do any of these things, die. If I can do these things, it's money time, right? Now I can download my new rule sets, and I can start attacking this sucker and stealing all of his information and taking over his computer. So I thought, shit, why can't we do that with the blockchain too? Why can't I have a series of rules for good, intrusion detection, antivirus, those types of rules, essentially. So when your application on your phone starts up for the first time, it's going, hey, am I running the correct version? Am I running the latest version? What are the rules? Do I have access to the network? If not, don't start. Right? So we need to add security at that level too. Right? Now, whether I always have the perfect details or not is actually irrelevant. Right? There's always some type of implementation that can be done. What I am confident of is something that I call a meta pattern. Okay? Meta patterns are something that has really influenced my thinking. There was a book that I read, you can still get it on Dead Trees, aka books, but you can't get it on Kindle. It was from a professor at my university, New York University, Tyler Volk, and it was called Meta Patterns. And this guy figured out a pattern in freaking everything, right? He tried to break it down to the most basic level. So for instance, a tube is really useful for a number of things. And it has weaknesses in certain things. A tube is a tunnel. I can go from here to here. I can make a train. Right? I can make a wire, makes electricity go from here to here. That's a tube. Right? A sphere has certain principles. It's really hard to get a grip on. Right? It has less drag. Right? Society, in many ways, is a sphere, and how we sort of form these things. So when I look at the world, and I look at designing systems, I'm looking at meta patterns. I'm looking at nature. How does nature do this? DNA is an amazing example of technology. Maybe you don't think of it as technology, but it is. It's biotechnology. In every one of your cells is a copy of your data. Perfect copy of your data. You can lose millions of cells, and your body's like, hey, no problem, I got another copy. Okay? I mean, it is massively redundant, massively parallel. Now, there are some improvements that we could work on. Right? If I lose this arm, maybe we go and get the thing from the lizards that can regenerate. That would be pretty awesome. We could slice that DNA in there, right? But again, all of these systems, I look to nature to try to understand it, and I look to how we do things in the real world, right? And so what I'm saying is, take inspiration from things that are not necessarily in technology, right? When you're designing a piece of technology, don't just say, well, what's the best practice? Oh shit, I looked this up. So O'Reilly book, this guy told me everything I need to know. I'm just gonna copy his shit. Oh, it's on GitHub, I'm just gonna fork it, it's done, right? That's a really lazy ass way of doing shit, right? It might be useful because sometimes it's not worth reinventing the wheel, and maybe there is, over time, a best practice that's developed. But also, I want people to think harder. What I call, my favorite thing in the world, everyone where I work laughs at Dan's favorite phrase is critical thinking. Critical thinking is how I get out of doing stupid shit I don't want to do. It's also how I get people to ask themselves, why the hell are you doing this way? And the answer, surprisingly most of the time, is I have no freaking idea. Or somebody told me to do it. Or somebody thought this was a good idea. For instance, a great example is like cold calling people. Okay, they love this idea in sales. We're gonna have a cold calling marathon. Everybody, we're gonna get all the drones in a room. You're gonna pound the horns for 3 hours. We're gonna make $1 million. No, you're not. You're gonna annoy a bunch of people, and you're gonna have a 0.5% success rate. It's such a piece of shit system, and people just do these types of things over and over again because they don't think about it. They don't take inspiration from other places in life, right? So everything that you learn in life, your education is what you were exposed to. That's what my greatest mentor always told me. High school English teacher, still one of my good friends. Still see him every chance that I get. Okay? What you are exposed to teaches you more things. In every area of life, we used to be more interdisciplinary thinkers. We used to learn how to paint and play the piano, and now we go, oh, that's stupid. I'm just going to learn how to code, right? But the problem is we become so narrow. And so I encourage everyone to look and learn as much as possible information outside of your normal sphere of knowledge, right? And then apply the things that you see and develop the ability to see clearly what is actually in front of you. You'd be surprised at how few people are able to actually look at something and say that that's actually what's happening. They imagine something is happening in their mind, but it's not actually there. People believe all kinds of crazy shit. And they're not looking at how reality is. But if you're going to design a system with that in mind, you're going to create a system that doesn't work. For example, if you don't believe that you are going to die if you get hit by a car, and you walk out into the street to try to prove that, you'll be proven wrong, right? But you are free to believe that, right? Which is insane. It's the definition of insanity is not actually looking at reality the way that it is, right? Look at reality the way that it is, study as much as possible, look for bigger patterns, bring that knowledge into what you're doing, and maybe, just maybe, we create a system that saves the fucking world instead of destroys it. Thank you, everybody.